If there's one person who can turn anyone's peaceful life into a living hell, it's the morality inspector neighbor. And I, as a poor sap who just wanted to live my life in the quiet of my farm, was the unfortunate winner of this lottery of bad luck. This woman, who arrived in the gated community a few months ago, had already shown that her presence would bring nothing but headaches. First, there was the fight over the height of the fences. Then the ridiculous attempt to ban anyone from lighting a barbecue in the backyard because the smoke from roasting meat was an attack on her sensitive lungs. As if it was my fault that she was born with an allergy to anything that involved happiness. But nothing compared to the big event that had everyone in the neighborhood talking about her for weeks. I was returning home after picking up some tools in town when, as I approached the farm, I noticed something strange. The gate to my stable was wide open. My first reaction was sheer despair. This was where I kept the horses and a few chickens loose, and I knew that none of my employees would open it for no reason. As I picked up the pace, what I found was a scene that, frankly, looked like something out of a comedy. There she was, standing in the middle of the stable, arms outstretched, shouting slogans as if she were the leader of a revolutionary animal riot. The horses? Well, they simply ignored the woman. After all, they were well-trained horses used to humans. But the biggest problem wasn't even them. The real problem was perched on top of the barn, watching everything with furious eyes. Mr. Bakudo, my rooster. Mr. Bakudo was no ordinary rooster. He was the supreme general of the barnyard, a war veteran who had driven off more deliverymen than I could count. And he was about to add another name to his list of victims. The woman, completely oblivious to the impending disaster, continued with her show. "You're free now! Get out! Taste freedom!" she screamed, as if the chickens were going to get an Uber and move to the big city. But the only thing that came down from the barn at that moment was Mr. Bakudo. It was like seeing the reincarnation of divine fury in the form of feathers. The rooster dived through the air like a winged projectile. His claws pointed at the invader's face and let out a war cry that made even me, who was used to his outbursts of fury, take a step back. She didn't even have time to react. The first blow hit her impeccably combed hair, ripping out a few strands and turning that perfect bun into something that looked like it had been attacked by a rusty chainsaw. The second blow, a sharp peck on the shoulder, caused her to let out a scream that could easily have been mistaken for the sound of a pig being exorcised. It was at that moment that chaos broke out. The woman, finally realizing that the animal revolution was not going as planned, tried to run. But Mr. Bakudo was not a forgiving rooster. He chased her like a feathered demon, flapping his wings and letting out those terrifying cackles that only a psychotic rooster knows how to give. She tripped over a bucket, fell face first into the straw, got up in despair, tried to hide behind one of the horses, who, by the way, didn't even mind the show going on, and finally ran out of the stable, screaming like a possessed banshee. When she finally made it to the gate, where I was standing with my arms crossed and a smile on my face, she turned to me with wide eyes, trying to catch her breath. "Your cock is a monster!" she shouted, pointing behind her, where Mr. Bakudo, now victorious, was marching slowly back to his territory, like a soldier who had just defended his homeland. I took a deep breath and gave a little smile. "You entered without permission. He's just protecting what's his." She looked at me as if I had spat on her. Still covered in straw, with her hair in a rat's nest and her clothes all crumpled up, she huffed, turned on her heels, and marched off towards the street, muttering something about prosecution and competent authorities. I just shook my head and went to close the stable. That was just the beginning. I knew that woman wasn't going to give up easily, but I also knew that the next time she tried something, Mr. Bakudo would be waiting. And this time, maybe he wouldn't be so merciful. After the horror show played out by the woman and Mr. Bakudo, I even considered that she had learned her lesson. But, as they say, Some people don't know when to give up. And this was undoubtedly one of those stubborn souls who refuse to accept their own stupidity. Over the next few days, I realized that she hadn't forgotten the humiliation she had suffered at the hands of my pet Rooster. On the contrary, it seemed to have ignited within her a desire for revenge. But instead of accepting that she had made a fool of herself and getting on with her life, she decided to double down. The first clue came in the form of a flyer. I went to the mailbox, as I did every morning, and among the bills and pizzeria advertisements, I found a flyer printed with the graphic quality of a poorly done school assignment. The headline screamed, "Torture Farm! Denounce this barbarism now!" The pamphlet, filled with completely invented information, accused my farm of being an animal concentration camp. According to the badly diagrammed graphic art, my horses were kept in tiny cells, my chickens forced to lay eggs until exhaustion, and, this was the best part, Mr. Bakudo had been described as an agribusiness demon trained to attack anyone who tried to free the innocent. I laughed. I laughed out loud, because it had to be a joke. But when I turned the page, it got even better. There was a petition attached, with the name of none other than the woman, demanding that I free the animals and close my farm. It was surreal. But the worst thing wasn't even the pamphlet. The worst thing was that, in a matter of hours, half the neighborhood had already received that piece of printed garbage and were now whispering about me as if I were some kind of cartoon villain. It didn't take long for the second attack to happen. In the afternoon of that same day, while I was feeding the horses, I heard a strange noise coming from the front gate. When I went to check, there she was, accompanied by a small group of people holding ridiculous placards with phrases like, "Animals are friends, not prisoners," and "Let the horses run free," a protest, on my doorstep, in front of a private property. I stood there, absorbing the idiocy of the scene. The woman at the center of the commotion was shouting as if she were speaking in Parliament. "This man keeps living beings as prisoners. These innocent creatures live under a regime of terror." It was so absurd that I almost expected a police helicopter and a live report to appear out of nowhere. But all that happened was that some neighbors, curious and probably bored, approached to see what was going on. She continued her inflated speech, pointing to the stables as if some kind of atrocity was happening there. And then came the part that really caught me off guard. "Today, we're going to do something to change that." Before I could react, she and two other idiots from her group ran to the gates, trying to force their way in. Now, I'm not a violent man, but if there's one thing I can't stand, it's trespassing. "Do you really want to play with this?" I asked, crossing my arms. But they ignored it. That's when the second beating of the day took place. Mr. Bakudo, once again, proved that he was no joking cock. When the invaders put their hands on the gates, he came out of nowhere, cackling like a possessed man, and flew straight into the face of one of the poor bastards, who ran off screaming in despair. The other tried to jump the fence. Bad idea. The farm dog, Thor, a German shepherd who didn't take any crap, appeared and started barking furiously. The guy froze, probably reviewing the life decisions that had led him there. And his wife? Oh, she went into a tailspin. Completely unresponsive, she watched the protest dissolve into a mess of running people, barking dogs, and a possessed rooster chasing an activist who was shouting, "My eye! He pecked out my eye!" Me? I just watched with my arms crossed, savoring every second of divine justice being served by an angry rooster. After a while, when they finally managed to get the woman and her followers away from my property, the neighbors began to disperse, some laughing discreetly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. She, humiliated for the second time in a few days, gave me a look of pure hatred before marching off down the dirt road, still covered in dust, and with her hair messier than ever. I knew this wasn't the end, not with that kind of person. But now I was ready. If she wanted war, then war she would have. And, apparently, so would Mr. Bakudo. The woman could have simply accepted defeat, healed her scratches and bites, and got on with her life. But no. Some people's ego is a black hole of insanity, sucking any shred of common sense into the abyss. After the protest fiasco, the neighborhood began to divide into two very distinct groups: those who saw the spectacle and laughed with me, and the few idlers who, for some inexplicable reason, decided that this lunatic was a martyr for the animal cause. Apparently, she wasn't willing to let it go. The next day, my patience was officially tested, when I woke up to find the front of my farm graffitied with words like "Assassin," "Free the horses," and a large drawing of what I assume was Mr. Bakudo, but looking more like a demon out of a satanic ritual. I took a deep breath. If there's one thing I hate more than nosy people, it's dirt on my property. I spent the whole morning cleaning up the mess, trying not to think about what else that crazy woman might be planning. The answer came quicker than I expected. In the afternoon of that same day, while I was resting on the veranda after finally leaving the gates clean, an official car pulled up in front of my farm. A town hall inspector got out, holding a clipboard and wearing that bureaucratic expression of someone who's been dragged in to sort something out. Guess who was with him? That's right, her, dressed in white, wearing huge sunglasses and holding a briefcase as if she were the head of an international NGO. She pointed at me as if she were denouncing a war criminal. The inspector climbed the steps of my balcony and sniffled. "Good afternoon, sir. We've received complaints about alleged irregularities on your property." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Irregularities?" I asked, already knowing exactly where this was coming from. "Yes, reports that the animals are being kept in unsuitable conditions, as well as concerns about possible mistreatment." I looked at the woman, who was smiling victoriously, her arms crossed as if she had finally caught me. "Right. Would you like to take a look at the stables?" I asked, pointing inside. The inspector hesitated, then looked at her, who stepped forward. "Yes, he needs to be investigated. The truth needs to be exposed." The man shrugged and accepted the invitation. The woman, of course, followed, clearly eager to see some horror scene that would justify her tantrum. I got in front and took them both to the stables. The horses were well fed, clean and resting peacefully. The stalls were spotless, the hay fresh, everything in order. I moved on to the chicken coop, where the hens were scratching freely, and Mr. Bakudo, now in a good mood, was staring at me from the top of a fence, as if he knew he had become a local celebrity. The inspector wrote a few things down on his clipboard, took a look at the drinking fountains, and, in the end, scratched his head. "Well, from what I can see here, the animals are well looked after. Nothing to indicate mistreatment." The woman's smile instantly disappeared. "What? Can't you see? They're locked up. Locked up. Do you think that's normal?" The inspector frowned, beginning to get annoyed. "Madam, he's a farmer. This is a rural property. Horses are kept in stalls. Chickens live in pens. That's not unusual." She opened her mouth to retort, but the man was already turning away. "Well, that concludes the inspection. There are no violations here." Before leaving, he looked at me with the look of someone who knew exactly the level of madness I was dealing with. She, on the other hand, stood in the middle of the stable, her fists clenched, her eyes full of fury and indignation. For a moment, I thought she was going to start foaming at the mouth and throw herself on the ground in rage. But instead, she turned abruptly and marched off like a defeated soldier, uttering a single warning before disappearing. "It's not over." Of course it wasn't over. I knew the type. People like that can't accept it when the world doesn't revolve around their ego. And if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that the more you ignore these types of people, the more desperate they are to get attention. And that's exactly what happened. The next morning, when I went to open the farm gate, I bumped into a small group of activists that lunatic had somehow managed to recruit. And now, instead of shouts and placards, they had brought trucks. And not just any trucks, animal transport trucks. She wasn't just going to protest anymore. She was going to try to steal my animals. The scene in front of my farm looked like something out of a bad movie about over-the-top activism. 2 cattle trucks were parked at the entrance, and a small group of lunatics, led by her, were preparing to carry out what could only be called a forced rescue operation. The woman had a megaphone, because, of course, drama was never enough. She shouted impact phrases while her followers, wearing T-shirts with ridiculous phrases like "Free the horses" and "No to animal barbarie," held ropes and even some collapsible bars. It was obvious that her genius plan was simply to enter my farm, open the stables, and throw the horses into the trucks. It was as simple as that, as if I were just an extra in her mental soap opera. My first impulse was to laugh. My second was to call the police. But before any reinforcements arrived, the woman decided to act. She raised one hand and shouted, "Let's go, friends, for justice!" And that's when it got fun. The lunatics ran to the gate and started trying to open the locks. 2 of them climbed over the side fence as if they were cartoon characters. One guy, who had clearly never set foot on a farm in his life, tried to jump straight into the corral and fell with a twisted ankle. But the real show began when she finally managed to unlock one of the gates and marched determinedly towards the stables, convinced that she was about to carry out the greatest animal rescue in history. She just hadn't counted on the real owner of that territory, Mr. Bakudo, the psychotic rooster, the destroyer of trespassers, the terror of mornings on the farm, and he was furious. The first warning came in the form of a guttural cackle, a sound that anyone with 2 neurons would understand as "stay out of here." But this woman didn't have a single functioning neuron, so she ignored it. Then he attacked. From a corner of the barn, Mr. Bakudo took off like a feathered rocket, wings spread, eyes blazing with the fury of 1,000 battles. He went straight for the woman's face, who didn't even have time to react. The first blow hit her forehead, knocking off her sunglasses and further messing up her hair, which had already suffered enough in the last week. The second was a sharp peck on the hand holding the megaphone, sending the object flying and falling to the ground like a useless piece of garbage. The woman let out a scream that was half panic and half absolute despair. "Get this monster away from me!" But no one moved. Her followers, who until then had been shouting slogans, were now paralyzed, watching in shock as their leader was reduced to nothing by a 1-meter cock of pure concentrated fury. She tried to run, but Mr. Bakudo was unforgiving. He gave chase, pecking, flapping his wings, letting out demonic cackles that made even the horses take a step back. She tripped over a bucket, fell flat on her face, got up, and started running again, her arms waving in the air as if she were being attacked by a cloud of killer bees. The activists? Well, those who hadn't fled were already recording everything with their cell phones. And that's when the sirens sounded. The police had finally arrived. 2 cars pulled up in front of the farm, and the officers got out with that, "For God's sake, what's happening now?" look. The woman, seeing the only chance to escape her humiliating fate, ran towards the officers, her eyes wide, her arms bruised by Mr. Bakudo's pecs. "This man is a criminal. He trains killer roosters. He's trying to kill me." The policeman looked at her, then at me, standing calmly with my arms crossed at the entrance to the barn. Then he looked at the trucks, the activists, the mess, and finally at the rooster, who was now back in the paddock, perched and staring at everyone like a triumphant king. And then came the question that sealed her fate. "Do you want to press charges for trespassing and attempted theft?" I smiled. Of course. Her face crumbled. She tried to argue, tried to say that it was all a misunderstanding. But her own followers were already jumping ship. One of them even walked away quickly, pretending he'd never been there. Another simply turned off his cell phone and pretended he didn't speak English. And then came the glorious moment. The policeman turned to her and, with all the calm in the world, said, "Madam, you are being arrested for trespassing and attempted animal theft." The color drained from her face. She screamed, squirmed, tried to resist, but the police handcuffed her without much effort and put her in the car. Before they got into the vehicle, she gave me one last look full of pure hatred and shouted, "You didn't win! I'm going to sue! It's not over yet!" But honestly, for me, it was already over. She was taken to the police station, the trucks were towed away, and the activists who were still there quickly dispersed, trying to pretend that they had never taken part in that tragedy. The neighbors who had watched the whole thing from afar approached, some holding back laughter, others congratulating me on finally having dealt with the crazy woman. And Mr. Bakudo? He simply puffed out his chest, cackled victoriously, and returned to the henhouse like the true king he was. In the following days, I learned that the woman had been released after posting bail, but had decided to move out of the neighborhood after the public humiliation she had suffered. And what about me? Well, I carried on with my life as normal, but with an extra sign in front of the farm. Caution, private property, and yes, there is a wild rooster. This time I don't think they'll invade again. And if you like what I've done, leave a comment and a like to support the channel.